So have you ever gone to work and just gone through the motions? Never. That's good to hear. Exactly. So you know what I'm talking about? And we actually have a term now for that. Have you ever heard of absenteeism? We now call it presenteeism. And they use it to study clergy. That a lot of us, when things get really stressful, just think if I can just make it through the end of the day and just kind of hold on for dear life and try to get through the end of the day or the week. Presenteeism, you're showing up, but you're probably not as effective as you might be. Highest death rate from heart disease of all professional groups. What's really interesting here is that in the 1950s, we as clergy had the lowest death rate from heart disease of all professional groups. So it switched. It split. Something to think about. What's going on? And then 73% of clergy spouses have fair to poor health. It continues on the backside. You can look at that on your own. I won't do that right now. But the conundrum, the question that I wrestle with is, look at the rates of clergy satisfaction, of the rate of clergy finding profound meaning in their work, and then look at their stress and health statistics. What's going on? Denial. What are you thinking, Nate? Internalizing denial. I don't even realize perhaps the amount of stress I'm under. My spouse might see it. I don't know if that's true for some of you. I know, again, my wife will call me on it. My friends will see it. Mark, we haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on? But I might not see it till other people call me on it because I internalize. Typical clergy person. May not be true of all of you, but it's true of a lot of you. What else might be going on with these statistics to explain the discrepancy? Yeah. Because whenever you say, I will you will. Stop being nobody. Right. So you keep that boundary so you'll stay nice. We put up with a lot of stuff, don't we? To keep the relationship. And so we may take it on the nose more than a lot of people would, because we need to keep that relationship in our congregation. Yeah. So I have met ministers. In fact, there's one minister who I really respect a lot. He was on our board of directors for a while. And he acknowledges that he works all the time. But he says, I love it. Now, here's the tricky part. He's retiring in a couple of years. Danger, danger, exactly. And he's trying to figure out, what do I do with now that I'll be retired? You know, because I've absorbed and immersed myself in work so much. I've immersed myself. How am I going to work retirement? How will I function in retirement?
Kind of the
well,
whatever promise to be like, so I'm the martyr. I'm a pastor. I'm a worker of the cross, so my cross is there, satisfying, but really hard, and I'm hard.
So the comment is, could it be the martyr syndrome? That I'm sacrificing myself and it's all for the good of the cause for Christ. and then I don't take care of myself in the midst of it, and I pay a price. Very much so. Right. So the comment is the satisfaction, and if God wants me to do it, I better be satisfied with it. And that gets to social desirability, that it would be hard for us to say we don't like ministry, because this is my calling. I said yes to this. I answered a call. And so it's really perhaps difficult for me to acknowledge how difficult it is and how stressed I am. Plus, I may not even know how stressed I am because I internalize it. And then it's family and friends speaking into my life saying, you know, Mark, are you doing okay? You don't look good. Yeah, you look tired. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
Kind of related to this, but the idea that you were mentioning before, how sometimes the parishioners have a standard, so that's what they're not.
Right.
Well, I know I do this. So, I'm a pastor. Now I'm supposed to. Don't be unbelievable. I am sure.
Yeah. So it's my self message. So the comment is there's the parishioner's expectations, but then there's the self expectation. So of course I know I might not be forgiven if I lose my temper in a meeting. And not to put an unrealistic standard on us, because I've lost my temper. I think most of us have lost our temper and done something that we wish we could reel it back, right? I mean, it's going to happen. I'm not going to be forgiven as much, or as easily, I should say, as a parishioner might. But I also put it on myself as a self-expectation. Like, I have to be better than human sometimes. Back there. It's huge. So the comment back there is, do I have any statistics or could I comment on the cultural changes affecting our ministry? I don't. But what I will say anecdotally is I've been tracking the amount of money denominations give us over the years, and it's shrinking because they don't have as much money, because churches don't have as much money, because fewer people are going to church. And if my paycheck as a minister to support my family and basic needs comes from churches, I'm going to feel stressed as a minister. And that's a cultural change. That's one. I mean, I've just been tracking in our center. So actually where I've gone with that, this is the threat versus challenge. I could get wigged up by that and think, oh my gosh, how will we survive as a center? I see it as there's never been a more important time in North America to offer psychological support to clergy, because you guys are under a lot of stress because of the cultural changes, because of the role of church shifting in our culture. Secondly, back in the 1950s, we had a huge volunteer workforce. Women often stayed home. Have you ever experienced trying to pull together a funeral lunch committee or a funeral lunch team at your church midweek? I don't know about your church, but it's kind of difficult where I live because a lot of the women are working, and then we have mostly only retired women. And as they age, it becomes harder for them. I mean, it's a real issue. So I think that's another flip, is the volunteer force that we could count on for decades is working. So that affects it. Yeah, so the question is, have we looked at data for dropout rates among clergy versus other professions because of the stress? I don't have it off the top of my head. I know it exists. The Harvard Institute did some research on dropout rates in the first 5 years of ministry. They're really significantly high. I don't know about Lutheran Brethren because they were looking at denominations in general. But that would be an interesting study for you all as well. So let's get back to the slide. But I wanted to share this data with you because I always, when I look at the statistics, if I had a profession where 90% of the people said they were highly satisfied and 98% said they found their work meaningful, I would be predicting health and happiness. Not what's happening. So you have your hardiness scores. And the question is, how do you use this information? It's interesting, isn't it? Taking a little self-assessment, but how do you use it in your ministry? Say, I'm going to go back 2 slides. Say I'm scoring lower on control. How might I use this information in my ministry? Yeah, there's a number there. So it's not, but if you just know, like you, yeah, well, if you rated yourself lower on those numbers, then you would know. Like if you're scoring negative, you would know. Mm-hmm. Here's one thought. I'm just going to tell you what I think. And that is, I think a lot of you will identify with this. There are seasons in my life, in my work life, where I feel it's beyond my control. 2008 recession, it hit us hard at the center, right? We were fine. I mean, we were thriving. 2008 hits, boom, recession is what I'm talking about. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa. I mean, I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't anticipated it as the executive director. What do we do with this? I know churches were experiencing this as well. What can I control? I can't control the economy. I can't control denomination, but I can control what brings me satisfaction in my life and helps me manage stress. So it really is. I exercise. I eat well. I find a confidence that I can talk about. Another colleague who does similar work in another part of the country to share, like, what are you trying? What are you experiencing? Oh my gosh, we're feeling it too. That's a way of sense of bringing back control. You control what you can and let go of what you can. Commitment. Every so often we'll meet with people in ministry who've lost or feel like they've lost their sense of call or their sense of focus. It might be just for a season. It might be just a particular ministry setting. But it helps to talk to somebody about that rather than to keep it inside and live with that. Because you can't tell your parishioners, right? Hey, I think I might have lost my call to ministry. Not going to go over very well. But you could talk to a counselor or a colleague and then challenge. We've been working on that. How do you reframe things to be a challenge rather than a threat? To get really specific, we meet with the seminarians with the Lutheran Brethren Seminary. We also meet with candidates for ministry. So I know some of you know about cognitive therapy because I've talked to you. And cognitive therapy is basically changing the way you look at a situation and reframing it. It sounds very straightforward, very simple. In some ways it is, but it's really hard to do in the moment when you really need it. It takes practice. I'm going to give you the title of a book that I think is really helpful. It's by a psychologist. And so it's not a theological or spiritual book, but it's the book that if you came to our center and worked with me as your counselor, and you were a long-term counseling client, we'd work through the book together. It's called Feeling Good by David Burns. There are other books out there on cognitive therapy. I think they're fine. But this is the one that I know is really accessible, that speaks to people, and I think can help a lot of people. Oh, it's David Burns, B-U-R-N-S. There are other books out there as well that you might find helpful in this area, but this is one way. I think of it as a way of building my resilience. Like, wow, life just threw me a curveball. I could like go to the dark side and think, drastic, catastrophic thoughts, Or I could see it as an opportunity to grow. I know that sounds hard, doesn't it? But believe me, with practice, you can get there. Any questions or comments about the hardiness personality scale? My whole point is you can increase your level of hardiness, and it's by focusing on control, commitment, and challenge. And it takes practice. What I've been trying to emphasize here is it's all about perception and how we see stress. And so the question is, can you make stress your friend? And I'm about to show you a video, a TED Talk by a health psychologist. And I think it really drives home what I've been trying to communicate this morning. And we can come back after the videotape or video and talk about, boy, that dates me, doesn't it? Videotape. And we can come back after the video and talk about what it might mean for minutes. So I'll start it now.
I have a confession to make. But first, I want you to make a little confession to me. In the past year, I want you to just raise your hand if you've experienced relatively little stress. Anyone? How about a moderate amount of stress? Who's experienced a lot of stress? Yeah, me too. But that is not my confession. My confession is this: I'm a health psychologist, and my mission is to help people be happier and healthier. But I fear that something I've been teaching for the last 10 years is doing more harm than good, and it has to do with stress. For years, I've been telling people stress makes you sick. It increases the risk of everything from the common cold to cardiovascular disease. Basically, I've turned stress into the enemy. But I've changed my mind about stress. And today, I want to change yours. Let me start with the study that made me rethink my whole approach to stress. This study tracked 30,000 adults in the United States for 8 years. And they started by asking people, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? And then they used public death records to find out who died. Okay, some bad news first. People who experienced a lot of stress in the previous year had a 43% increased risk of dying. But that was only true for the people who also believed that stress is harmful for your health. People who experienced a lot of stress but did not view stress as harmful were no more likely to die. In fact, they had the lowest risk of dying of anyone in the study, including people who had relatively little stress. Now, the researchers estimated that over the 8 years they were tracking deaths, 182,000 Americans died prematurely, not from stress, but from the belief that stress is bad for you. That is over 20,000 deaths a year. Now, if that estimate is correct, that would make believing stress is bad for you the 15th largest cause of death in the United States last year, killing more people than skin cancer, HIV, AIDS, and homicide. You can see why this study freaked me out. Here I've been spending so much energy telling people stress is bad for your health. So this study got me wondering, can changing how you think about stress make you healthier? And here the science says yes. When you change your mind about stress, you can change your body's response to stress. Now, to explain how this works, I want you all to pretend that you are participants in a study designed to stress you out. It's called the social stress test. You come into the laboratory, and you're told you have to give a 5-minute impromptu speech on your personal weaknesses to a panel of expert evaluators sitting right in front of you. And to make sure you feel the pressure, there are bright lights and a camera in your face, kind of like this. And the evaluators have been trained to give you discouraging nonverbal feedback, like this. Now that you're sufficiently demoralized, time for part 2, a math test. And unbeknownst to you, the experimenter has been trained to harass you during it. Now, we're gonna all do this together. It's gonna be fun, for me. Okay. I want you all to count backwards from 996 in increments of 7. You're gonna do this out loud as fast as you can, starting with 996. Go. Go faster. Faster, please. You're going too slow. Stop, 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 stop. That guy made a mistake. We're gonna have to start all over again. You're not very good at this, are you? Okay, so you get the idea. Now, if you were actually in this study, you'd probably be a little stressed out. Your heart might be pounding, you might be breathing faster, maybe breaking out into a sweat. And normally, we interpret these physical changes as anxiety or signs that we aren't coping very well with the pressure. But what if you viewed them instead as signs that your body was energized, was preparing you to meet this challenge? Now, that is exactly what participants were told in a study conducted at Harvard University. Before they went through the social stress test, they were taught to rethink their stress response as helpful. That pounding heart is preparing you for action. If you're breathing faster, it's no problem. It's getting more oxygen to your brain. And participants who learned to view the stress response as helpful for their performance, well, they were less stressed out, less anxious, more confident. But the most fascinating finding to me was how their physical stress response changed. Now, in a typical stress response, your heart rate goes up and your blood vessels constrict like this. And this is one of the reasons that chronic stress is sometimes associated with cardiovascular disease. It's not really healthy to be in this state all the time. But in the study, when participants viewed their stress response as helpful, their blood vessels stayed relaxed like this. Their heart was still pounding, but this is a much healthier cardiovascular profile. It actually looks a lot like what happens in moments of joy and courage. Over a lifetime of stressful experiences, this one biological change could be the difference between a stress-induced heart attack at age 50 and living well into your 90s. And this is really what the new science of stress reveals, that how you think about stress matters. So my goal as a health psychologist has changed. I no longer want to get rid of your stress. I want to make you better at stress. And we just did a little intervention. If you raised your hand and said you'd had a lot of stress in the last year, we could have saved your life. Because hopefully the next time your heart is pounding from stress, you're going to remember this talk, and you're going to think to yourself, this is my body helping me rise to this challenge. And when you view stress in that way, your body believes you, and your stress response becomes healthier. Now, I said I have over a decade of demonizing stress to redeem myself from. So we are going to do one more intervention. I want to tell you about one of the most underappreciated aspects of the stress response. And the idea is this: stress makes you social. To understand this side of stress, we need to talk about a hormone, oxytocin. And I know oxytocin has already gotten as much hype as a hormone can get. It even has its own cute nickname, the cuddle hormone, because it's released when you hug someone. But this is a very small part of what oxytocin is involved in. Oxytocin is a neurohormone. It fine-tunes your brain's social instincts. It primes you to do things that strengthen close relationships. Oxytocin makes you crave physical contact with your friends and family. It enhances your empathy. It even makes you more willing to help and support the people you care about. Some people have even suggested we should snort oxytocin to become more compassionate and caring. But here's what most people don't understand about oxytocin. It's a stress hormone. Your pituitary gland pumps this stuff out as part of the stress response. It's as much a part of your stress response as the adrenaline that makes your heart pound. And when oxytocin is released in the stress response, it is motivating you to seek support. Your biological stress response is nudging you to tell someone how you feel instead of bottling it up. Your stress response wants to make sure you notice when someone else in your life is struggling so that you can support each other. When life is difficult, your stress response wants you to be surrounded by people who care about you. Okay, so how is knowing this side of stress going to make you healthier? Well, oxytocin doesn't only act on your brain, it also acts on your body. And one of its main roles in your body is to protect your cardiovascular system from the effects of stress. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. It also helps your blood vessels stay relaxed during stress. But my favorite effect on the body is actually on the heart. Your heart has receptors for this hormone. And oxytocin helps heart cells regenerate and heal from any stress-induced damage. This stress hormone strengthens your heart. And the cool thing is that all of these physical benefits of oxytocin are enhanced by social contact and social support. So when you reach out to others under stress, either to seek support or to help someone else, you release more of this hormone, your stress response becomes healthier, and you actually recover faster from stress. I find this amazing that your stress response has a built-in mechanism for stress resilience. And that mechanism is human connection. I want to finish by telling you about one more study. And listen up, because this study could also save a life. This study tracked about 1,000 adults in the United States, and they ranged in age from 34 to 93. And they started the study by asking, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, how much time have you spent helping out friends, neighbors, people in your community? And then they used public records for the next 5 years to find out who died. Okay, so the bad news first. For every major stressful life experience, like financial difficulties or family crisis, that increased the risk of dying by 30%. But, and I hope you are expecting a but by now, but that wasn't true for everyone. People who spent time caring for others showed absolutely no stress-related increase in dying, 0. Caring created resilience. And so we see once again that the harmful effects of stress on your health are not inevitable. How you think and how you act can transform your experience of stress. When you choose to view your stress response as helpful, you create the biology of courage. And when you choose to connect with others under stress, you can create resilience. Now, I wouldn't necessarily ask for more stressful experiences in my life, but this science has given me a whole new appreciation for stress. Stress gives us access to our hearts. The compassionate heart that finds joy and meaning in connecting with others. And yes, your pounding physical heart working so hard to give you strength and energy. And when you choose to view stress in this way, you're not just getting better at stress, you're actually making a pretty profound statement. You're saying that you can trust yourself to handle life's challenges. And you're remembering that you don't have to face them alone. Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, this is kind of amazing what you're telling us. It seems amazing to me that a belief about stress can make so much difference to someone's life expectancy. How would that extend to advice? Like if someone's making a lifestyle choice between, say, a stressful job and a non-stressful job, does it matter that which way they go, that it's equally wise to go for the stressful job so long as you believe that you can handle it in some sense?
Yeah, and one thing we know for certain is that chasing meaning is better for your health than trying to avoid discomfort. And so I would say that's really the best way to make decisions, is go after what it is that creates meaning in your life, and then trust yourself to handle the stress that follows.
Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
That's really cool.
Cool. Okay. Close the loop for me. How does this relate to ministry? This TED Talk. Exactly. So it is stressful, the ministry, as we saw from the statistics, right? But if you see stress as your friend and not necessarily the enemy, and you can reframe it, that's what's going to give us resilience. And go for what's meaningful, because that ultimately will be the most satisfying. And for those of us who have felt a call to ministry, if we keep that commitment and keep that alive, then that can contribute to resilience. What about for those of us who are struggling with our call right now? What might that individual do to rekindle the commitment of the call? Her comment is collect more hugs. Hmm. Yeah, it is a frame changer. It's right there in Scripture, isn't it? I was thinking that too. When it comes to perception, when it comes to the exemplar ministers who go, exemplar meaning effective or outstanding ministers, going to Scripture, going to prayer, going to the change of frame, giving us perspective. Mhm. Yes. So the comment is, we find, according to the statistics, we find ministry really, really meaningful. But we're also very stressed out in body and spirit. And maybe we're trying to do it alone. And what would it be like to share this? And not only with each other, but I think that's a great first step as colleagues, but also with our congregants. And what does that look like? And maybe it's become more about us and we've lost perspective. I mean, I can be my own worst critic at times, but maybe that's a little bit too much self-absorption as a possibility. Yes, Nate.
Human and God-like expectations of ourselves when it's God's word.
Yes.
And so, to think of that and say, we're human serving a God who equips us, but it's good for us.
Yeah. So Nate's comment is, we are human beings, flesh and blood, mortal. But we put God-like expectations on ourselves. And what would it be like to give it back to God? I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of how I heard it. To give it back to God, to do our part, but also to have faith that there's something beyond us at work. The Holy Spirit working through us, through our congregation, through others. Doesn't all need to be on my shoulders. Any other connection back that you'd like to make? So there's commitment. I would talk to other people and share with them confidence. Control what you can, let go of what you can't, which is giving it back to God in a sense. And challenge. All things are possible through Christ. Doesn't mean it'll come out the way I want it to, but it'll come out perhaps the way that was supposed to be through God and the Spirit. The other thought, too, So that's the theological frame. And that's a great resource that we have from a mental emotional standpoint as clergy. And that's not why we do it. We do it because we're spiritual beings and that's what we truly believe. But it does help on a mental and emotional level. So to keep that in mind. I'm going to go psychological on you. And back in the 1950s, there's a curmudgeonly psychologist by the name of Albert Ellis who you take his personality as just being mid 20th century curmudgeon, okay? East Coast curmudgeon. And what I like about him is that he just says it how it is. And he's the one who came up with a school of thought called rational emotive behavioral therapy, which then became cognitive therapy down the road. And in his speech to the American Psychological Association, he was the new president of the APA back in the 1950s, he said, there are 12 things that make us miserable, 12 thoughts. Nobody could remember 12 things. So then he later in his writing said, there are 10 thoughts that will make us miserable. Nobody could remember 10. So then in one of his later books, he said, there are 4 thoughts that will make us miserable. And if you remember these 4 thoughts and think of them as irrational beliefs or cognitive distortions, and keep them in that framework and let go of them, you'll be more satisfied and healthier. The reason I share it with you, this is my experience. You may not agree with me, but it's my experience, is that as a minister, I tend to be more on the sensitive side, more on the empathic side. For the people I meet in ministry who come to our center, they tend to be more on the emotional, sensitive side. And cognitive therapy is helpful because it helps us step back and get the wider frame from a more objective standpoint. So these are the 4 thoughts. Are you ready? Number 1, see if any of these resonate with you in ministry. If you believe this thought in ministry, you're going to be miserable. People need to like me. Ever have that thought? Well, let me share with you that on the MMPI, I know that you have that thought. I've seen the subscale that candidates for ministry and clergy on average score much higher than the general population on the need to please others. And that's relating to wanting people to like me. So I know for a fact that's a thought that trips up a lot of us. Really, it's not about that in the end as much as pleasing and living out a calling, right? That's the first thought that will make us miserable. And that goes for clergy spouses too, and family members, because we often fall into that trap with clergy families. Number 2, I need to be perfect. How many times have I put that on myself in ministry? Ooh, I said the wrong word. I said the wrong thing. Oh, I only wish I could have done that better. If we believe I need to be perfect in ministry, we're going to make ourselves miserable, and it will contribute to emotional distress, anxiety, and perhaps even sadness. Number 3, see if this ever plays out in your ministry. Situations need to turn out the way I want them to turn out. If we believe that, we're going to be miserable. How many times have I planned something in my congregation and it did not come to fruition? How many times did I plan something in the congregation and it went completely a different direction? I lost control of it and became something I never intended. And somebody was hurt by it. How many times have I said we're going to try one new thing in worship this Sunday, and it's just an experiment. We'll go back to the old method of worship, the old worship program after this Sunday, but I just want to try this one new thing. And I get somebody who calls me that week and says, I'm withholding my pledge. It's no longer the church that I thought it was. I'm thinking, I said it was only for that one Sunday, right? Situations don't always turn out the way we want them to. How many times have I thought I would help the congregation catch a vision that they worked at with me to create, only to have it be forgotten within a year? situations need to turn out the way I want them to turn out. If we believe that, we're going to be miserable. Are you ready for number 4? See if this ever plays out in your ministry. This thought. People need to behave the way I want them to behave. Yeah. So if you believe that, you're going to be miserable. And again, how many times has somebody said an unkind thing to me, an unkind thing to a family member, grumbled about a program, and they're not behaving the way I want them to behave? Is that not par for the course in ministry? Do these resonate with you at all, these 4 thoughts? So that's a way of keeping in mind what are cognitive distortions or irrational beliefs, and then countering them. And I literally will keep a notebook and write down, and I practice this. And actually, this is what a cognitive psychologist would tell you to do. Whether you think you've going through a tough time or not, just take 10 to 15 minutes a day, write down what are your thoughts behind for a situation that's going on. First of all, just sit down and think, am I under stress? You'd be surprised the number of days that you thought you weren't under stress when things will start to come up from your subconscious. And then you write it down, and then you try to identify the thoughts that are contributing to the stress. And you'll see, people need to like me. I need to be perfect. Situations need to turn out the way I want them to. And or the last one, people need to behave the way I want them to behave. And then you take a more objective reframe of them. Where's it written in the world, in the universe, that people need to behave the way Mark Sunby wants them to behave? And I guess that's not a law of nature, huh? People get to behave any darn way they want to, whether I like it or not. Where's it written in the universe that situations need to turn out the way I want them to turn out? And it's all in God's hands. It might even turn out better than I ever conceived. I mean, you can work through these thoughts that way, and that's a way to change your perception. For more information, I really do recommend 2 books, actually. Feeling Good by David Byrne, which I already mentioned. The second one is by this curmudgeon. And if you can tolerate him being a curmudgeon, it's a great book. How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable by Albert Ellis, E-L-L-I-S. How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable. It was written in the 1980s, and I listened to it once a year on Audible, and it's just always a great experience for me. And the reason I say he's a curmudgeon is he has an edge to him, he has opinions, and you just kind of take him in stride because the core of what he says is really, really helpful. Any thoughts or questions about that? I actually gave this talk in Scotland about 2 years ago, and one of the pastors in the Church of Scotland emailed me to let me know that he has his whole congregation reading Feeling Good, and they have conversations about it. I don't know. You don't need to go that far. But David Byrne, B-U-R-N-S. And the other book is by Albert Ellis, E-L-L-I-S. So I wanted to get to happiness because we've been talking a lot about stress. And there's some interesting research coming out on happiness. Some of you may have read the book called Authentic Happiness by Martin Seligman, S-E-L-I-G-M-A-N, Martin Seligman. The idea is, even if we're not depressed or clinically anxious, a lot of us would like to have more satisfaction in our lives. As Christian ministers, we believe a lot of that is related to our spirituality, and there's research to bear that out. It's really true. And actually, that's a whole nother presentation I do on the emotional health benefits and physical health benefits of going to church. There's actually a lot of research out there to support this. This is the broad overview, though, and it's a formula that Martin Seligman has come up with, and that is happiness level, H, equals set range of happiness. Set range is what is genetic in you. Temperamentally, some of us are more happy than others based on our genes. What he finds, actually it's not him, what the research finds in general, because he's writing a summary of the research, is about half of our happiness can be attributed specifically to genetics. But 50% is beyond that. And those factors would include circumstances and factors under our voluntary control. Circumstances we can't control. So we have genetics and then we have circumstances. And what are the circumstances that contribute to higher levels of satisfaction in the psychological research? Do the following. Live in a wealthy democracy. Get married. Make friends. Avoid negativity, which gets right back to that whole perception cognitive therapy piece, and get religion. Those factors, according to the research, contribute to happiness. Don't bother with making more money, staying healthy. That's interesting. Acquiring an education, changing your climate, changing your race, or changing your gender. Let me explain a couple of these. For staying healthy, they looked, and maybe you know this research, they looked at people who became paraplegics, lost use of their limbs, and they measured their happiness right after the loss of the use of their limbs. And then they measured them 8 weeks later, and they were right back to a higher rate of happiness that matched their baseline before they had the accident. In other words, we go back. The good news is if we go through a critical health experience, and even if we develop a chronic health condition, we're wired to return to our set point. The bad news is if your set point's lower, even if something wonderful happens, you're wired to come back to your set point. So some of it's temperamental. Change of climate. It doesn't look too bad out there today. But have you ever wondered what it would be like to be in San Diego right now? Santa Barbara? Hawaii? Yeah, you think you'd be happier, right? You know that the rates of happiness are no higher than Minnesotans, or people in northern Canada, or people on the East Coast. I mean, it makes no difference. And then they also wondered about people of certain races and gender. It makes no difference. Those don't contribute to greater happiness. So about 25% is related to circumstances, which leaves 25% is under what? Our voluntary control. So I have two sons. One's 24 and one's 21. I was sharing this research with them a few years ago, and the older son, who's temperamentally more an optimist, said, "Oh, this is great news. 25%, I can be 25% happier? That's under my control?" The other one, who's wired to be a bit more of a pessimist, said, "Oh, why even try? 75% is out of my hands." The thing to know about this is even if you have a set point for happiness, you can continue to work on that 25%. And you can continue to reframe and test the accuracy of your cognitions or thoughts. And that's going to contribute to greater life satisfaction. Will you ever be as happy? Will my younger son ever be as happy as my older son? Temperamentally, probably not. But can he at least be happier than he is? Absolutely. And that's the key. They continue to practice whatever God has given us in terms of our wiring. We can work with that to continue to find health and happiness. I'm going to wrap up with a couple of more things. And there's research out there on something called savoring. How many of you have seen that research on savoring? So savoring is the idea that we get so busy that we miss the gift of the present moment. That think about how incredible this is, the world we live in. Think about the sunrise, the sunset, the change of seasons. Think about how fortunate we are that we got up this morning and we were able to come here. Have you ever thought about just turning on a water faucet and seeing running water? That's amazing. And if there's millions of people in this world who will never even experience that. Savoring is the idea that when you're in the present moment, there's already a lot to be grateful for. Let me share with you a couple of examples. One is when I worked in the chronic pain program at the hospital, we used to say, if you're breathing, there's more right with you than wrong with you. It's a reframe. You're here. Secondly, I was a poor graduate student once upon a time. And I'll never forget this. I'm living in a really run-down place. I'm literally counting pennies at the end of the month to take to the grocery store to buy potatoes that I can bake. And I really did not have much money, right? I'm starting to feel the weight of it. This is a several-year program. And I was reading a book called Flow. And I don't know if you've seen the research on positive psychology by Chick Mackay. And not a neat name you need to know, but the book is called Flow. And he was talking about happiness and how back in the day, 500 years ago, think about this, who had running water? Really only the royalty. And it was kind of fabricated. It's not the water we know about today, how we can turn on a faucet, but they created a system where they would have something like running water. And how many people had flush toilets? You ever thought about this 500 years ago? Hardly anyone, right? And I'll never forget going to the bathroom and flushing my toilet over and over again and thinking, I'm so blessed. It was a complete reframe, and it worked. The other time is I drove a really rundown car as well, and I'll never forget driving down the highway 55 miles per hour with a stereo playing, thinking, this is incredible. And it's a beat-up Toyota, right? 15 years old, this is incredible. And my grandmother, she would tell us about how she used to ride to school on the horseback, on the back of a horse. And to think how far we've come in that 100 years. So again, what's under our control? A lot isn't, but we can reframe and we can learn to savor. Savoring is the awareness of pleasure and the conscious attention to the experience of pleasure. This is by research out of Loyola University in Chicago. And do I have well, I guess since I'm hooked up with the wire, with the microphone, I'll go ahead and read it. But Joseph Spiroff, one of the researchers in savoring, gives this example from his own life. He says, I find a quiet moment when I can linger a bit with them and read them in order and let the words roll very slowly over me like a warm, gentle shower. I read each one slowly. Sometimes they are highly sentimental, and yet I can't hold back the tears. Sometimes they are profoundly insightful about what has been happening to them, the world around them, and I am amazed. I can almost feel the children gathered in the room in which I'm reading. And he's writing about letters from his adult children. And what would it be like to just savor those moments? Where am I going with this for ministry? Has this ever happened to you? I have what legitimately was a successful event at church. This time it turned out the way I had hoped, and even better. What do? Do I savor it? Or do I go on to the next path, the next event? taking the time to really savor. And there are 4 aspects to savoring, according to the researchers. There's basking, where you literally just take it all in and you bask in the glow of a success. A lot of us in this room are Minnesotans. I don't know how easy this will be to do. Thanksgiving, we're grateful for what's happened and we really express gratitude for what's happened. Marveling. Beautiful room, beautiful windows looking out. Isn't that pretty with the snow? The other day, trying to think, I was driving back from another conference, from a retreat. And we had, what, 15 inches of snow in the Twin Cities. And I was in a hurry to get back because I was tired and I wanted to get back to rest. But it just caught my eye, like, this is incredible, gorgeous. And to see the snow hanging from the trees like it does on the branches, it was amazing. That's marveling. How many of you have ever been on a hike in the mountains? You know what I'm talking about. Staying over the valley, seeing the peaks, just really letting yourself take the time to take it in. And then luxuriating. Again, as Minnesotans, I don't know how well we do this, and I know there's people across the country, but to think about, do we really take the time to feel things through our senses? To notice smells, to notice taste. I have to share with you, I was in a mindfulness group to learn how to be more mindful in the moment. And one of the exercises was to learn how to eat more mindfully, to have a whole day where we would pay attention to how things tasted. And when you do that, you really slow down the pace of your eating and really experience it. But we came back the following week, and one of the participants said, you know, he used to think he liked milk duds. Have you ever really tasted a milk dud? Have you ever really just tried to savor it? Apparently, it's not very good. He said he'll never taste milk duds again. Similarly, what's it like to savor food that really is tasty, that is well done? And there are 5 savoring techniques that they recommend. Number 1 is sharing with others. It comes back to the idea of social support. In your ministry, who do you share with? I'm curious, who do you share with when it comes to ministry? Wife? Mm-hmm. Colleague? Well, God? I would think about whether you take the time to share with others when things go really well. You take time to celebrate. I'd also think about sharing with your congregation. Maybe, I know several of you already do this, but having them say this. Like, wow, let's talk about how that went and let's just celebrate and give thanks to God for what a wonderful thing that just happened here. Number 2 is memory building. The way you build memories is similar to sharing with others. You consciously try to take it in and you verbally share with people who you had the experience with. So how many of you have ever talked to old friends from college about your old college days? That's an example of memory building. It's keeping the memories alive. Number 3 is self-congratulation. Again, this is somewhat cultural, but it's patting yourself on the back. And Minnesotans and others may not be as adept at this, but it is taking the time to say, you know what? That actually went well, and I made a real effort, and it was worth the time I put in. And I feel good that I took the extra time and made that up. Number 4 is sharpening perception. Just really paying attention to what's going around me. And that again means slowing down, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, touch. And then finally is absorption. And this relates back to the other slide with marveling. It's letting yourself just get lost in an experience. In ministry, you might want to think about where you've experienced these techniques and how you might use them. So I think we're almost ready for questions. Does that work? So, but any questions about savoring before we transition, or about cognitive reframing and perceptions and hardiness and that kind of thing? You all have cards to write on?
All right. One of the questions here is, how can we help our wives who have less control over things than we do?
Great question. So I'd be curious about your thoughts. And I see a range of ages, and I'm guessing years of experience in ministry. How do you help your wives who have less control over ministry, what's going on in congregation? Kind of flow with the ebb and tide of it all, with the vicissitudes of it. So I'll repeat it for you. One thing is he used to take the kids to the Mall of America to give his wife a whole day off. And so it was a sense that she could get rebalanced, regrounded, that kind of thing, refreshed. Yeah.
Devotions together. I know that's not a no-brainer, but
Yeah. So to do devotions together, it really depends on the research that you look at, whether that's a no-brainer or not. So, for instance, in one study, they found that about a third of clergy participate in daily spiritual practices, meaning 66% don't. And in another study, they found 66% do, but 33% don't. And it does depend on denomination, maybe, but I also think it depends on where we're at in our lives. And related, and what they do, though, is the clergy will rationalize it and say, well, I do scripture reading. They're really preparing for the next sermon, or they're working that kind of thing. But yes, back to your point, I don't have the statistics on how many couples pray together and do devotions together, but that would be a wonderful way to give her a sense of reframe, of the bigger perspective, recommitment.
Say, Mark, one of the things that was mentioned earlier was about boundaries. And I think there are things we take home and there are things that we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And this came out in my interviews with participants in our church, pastors and leaders, regarding those kind of boundaries, and setting those is important. I don't know if you have any comments on that, things we bring home, things we don't, setting that, that's a way, or maybe one way we can help our wives, our spouses. So
Again, I would keep the boundary really, and this is difficult because the reality is my wife is my best friend. I mean, this is really true. I'm not just saying that. And she's the person who knows me best and who I confide in. So it's hard not to confide in her when something happens at church. On the other hand, she really does have no control. And so it might be setting a boundary about how much I share with her and where I share the really stuff that I know would just make her angry and frustrated and feel powerless, and share that with a colleague. Mm-hmm. That's excellent. So did you all hear that? I'll repeat it. So his wife may not be in control, but she likes to have the illusion that she's in control. So part of it then is to help her find a place where she really can be in control in ministry and take charge of it and feel like she's having influence, a positive influence. I think it's really healthy. I think this is there's research on the impact of ministry on wives and also on families. And just to be really cognizant that when we are unable as clergy to keep good boundaries, there's a cost somewhere, and it's usually a toll taken on wives and on kids. And somebody asked about people leaving ministry. And actually, in one study, that's one of the major reasons that clergy leave ministry is the unhappiness of their wives. And nobody would ever say that out loud. But they have those conversations at the kitchen table. Yeah, excellent example. So to share what you said, your sister, so you grew up in a pastor's family, and dad never came home and griped about parishioners around the kitchen table or with your family. Your sister then spent some time with another family who the dad was the pastor. He would come home and grumble and gripe, and she was stunned that it was not helpful. And actually, that's another dynamic I see, that when we confide too much with a spouse about what's going wrong over which they have no control, what do? What's the natural human response? It's to ally with the husband, right? And get mad at the parishioners. And it just reinforces the negativity of the pastor, and it just continues to build. And they become this alliance. It's great that they're allied. I mean, they're in love with each other, but it's an unhealthy alliance at that point where it's reinforcing negativity. Any other questions about that or thoughts?
Here's another question. What is the impact on us as pastors when we have a stressful parishioner who causes stress in our lives?
Yeah, wouldn't church be great without the people? I'm just saying. I've often thought that. As a psychologist, it'd be a great job too if people didn't come and tell me all their problems. I'm kidding. Completely kidding. So what is the impact of us when we have a parishioner who's difficult, a difficult person in our congregation? Okay. Send them to another church. Actually, when they leave, maybe don't worry about it, right? People need to like me. They'll never like me. Good. Go find some place that feeds your soul, possibly. What else? We actually lead a workshop on how to deal with difficult people in the parish. It's a full day workshop. So actually it's an overnight workshop now that I'm thinking about it. So it's a, 2-day workshop. There's a lot to say about this. But did somebody else have a comment about what's the impact on you? What is the impact on you of a difficult congregational member?
I'm sharing that with my wife.
Yeah.
Person that
Makes for an unhappy spouse, doesn't it? So the comment was, it goes back to the spouse and how she feels no control and she gets upset and she cries. And I saw a couple of like people saying, yeah, I know what you're talking about as I was looking out here. I know what you're talking about. I remember what that's like. It really was unfair to her, to be honest. It gets back to boundaries because she really had no control. So it affects family. Next, I'm trying to think, always have to protect confidentiality, but you'll never know this person because I won't get specific. But next week, there's an individual coming in and he called our center. So one thing I want you to know about our center is that we're here for you across your ministerial career. It's not just with candidacy or something. Because this individual has been in ministry for about 20 some years. He's been at the same church for about 15 years. And he's coming in because he was in a congregational meeting where they were voting on his salary. He's had a great relationship with this congregation until this year. And this meeting, when people stood up and said, well, why are we giving him so much for professional expenses? And he took that as a question of his character. And they really got kind of heated about it. He came home and told his wife and kids about what happened at church because he's never had that level of distrust before in his congregation. And normally he would keep that boundary, but it was so heavy on him, he just unloaded. And his kids started to cry. And his wife started to cry. And there's nothing they can do because the conversation's over. And of course, the kids can never bring it up. And it's a small town, so the kids go to school with the kids of these other people in the congregation. It really impacted that family. And now he's coming to our center to kind of talk it through and try to get perspective and such. One technique, do you know Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, right? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I like this one thing he says in the book, where before he goes into his house after a hard day at work, and even after a good day at work, he'll touch a tree in his front yard. Do you remember this? And let all those problems just discharge into the tree. And he can pick them up the next day when he comes out to go back to work. He can touch it again, and it'll come back to him what he needs to worry about. He puts all his worries into that tree in the front yard, and he goes into his house, and he's completely there for his family. How's the tree? He's on his 3rd tree, right? It's a big tree. The question was, how's the tree doing? And he's on his 3rd tree.
You know, this also came out in conversations with pastors and leaders from our church. If it's a stressful individual, to be direct. How do we, you know, maybe it's something we're not aware of, but to have a direct conversation with an individual in a situation possibly like that. So.
Yeah, how do you have those direct conversations? That's really difficult for pastors. I've seen your psychological profiles. And I know. We're not the most assertive, direct people, you know, because it's hard for us. Most of us don't like conflict. What are the top 2 styles for conflict management among clergy? Avoiding and accommodating, which is basically giving in. So how do we learn to be more direct? And I think that's going to be a growth edge for most of us. I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I can just name the problem. Yeah, the comment, it helps to move to the East Coast because they're much more direct. I'm just going to add a tag on to that for people who come to the Midwest. That's true. It's cultural. A lot of this is cultural. And so we have people call our center, ministers who are new to the region who say, I don't get this. These people, I don't understand them. I'm from New York and I'm in Minnesota. I need to talk to somebody at your center to try to figure out who are these people? Yeah, right. We'll try.
Here's another question. Can stressful reactions to stressful situations be habitual? And if so, can we unlearn this habit?
It's an excellent question. And I would say yes, And I would say that some of us get hooked to adrenaline. We don't feel like we're really working unless we're like stressed out, or that we can't do our best unless we're stressed out. And it's going to take a little bit of trust to know that when you feel relaxed, you're still effective, that you don't need to stay up. And actually, a lot of you are experienced ministers, and you wouldn't have made it this far if you hadn't figured this out. But when I was starting out in ministry, Saturdays were stress time for me. I'm thinking of the first church I served, because everything was new. And I literally would burn the candle at both ends. I didn't know what I was doing. I was thrown into the deep end, right? You can learn a different way. And in fact, if you don't, you'll burn out. That's how that works. And there are definitely techniques that you could talk with a counselor about. And one is simply relaxation training. And you can look it up. You can Google it. It's called progressive muscle relaxation, where you simply tense different parts of your body and relax them. And I do suggest you learn it. It's a way that if you do it 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night, it's going to make a difference.
I love your comment. You made this at our last workshop with the students. You're in a stressful situation, maybe it's the boardroom, and you accidentally drop your pen.
Ah, that's right.
But there's wisdom behind that, and it gives you a moment. I remember a quote: "Speak when you are angry, and you will make the best speech you ever regret." But it gives you a moment. I've before even said, "Excuse me, I have to use the bathroom," and it gives you a moment to not react. So I think the idea of how do we stop a habitual response, some creative ways, like dropping a pen.
Exactly. And so what Nate is referring to actually comes out of MIT in the relationship lab, where they coach leaders how to diffuse a tense situation in like board meetings. And it works with ministry too. What's the name of the decision making? Is it church council? Elder board. So you're with your elder board, it's getting really heated. You literally knock over your glass or you drop your pen, and there's a flurry of confusion, and you reach down to like grab paper towels or, pick up your pen. It creates enough of a gap that you don't react and everybody else is distracted, and then you can come back to it. I know it sounds manipulative, but it works.
Another question here. What is the relationship between our stress level, coping mechanisms, etc., and our theology? And does this change related to our theological traditions?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I'd be curious what you think. There you go. I'm going to repeat that. I think Lutherans are less stressed because we have the gospel, right? It's a great question. I think I'm going to be honest as a psychologist. We work ecumenically, and we work with people from the whole theological range. So we work with Bethel Seminary, and we work with Baptists, and we work with Presbyterians and Methodists and ELCA. We work with what are some others? Moravians. I mean, just a whole gambit. And we even go to the far end for Unitarians. And what I would say is, this is being honest. You want honesty, right? In the first 5 years of ministry, theology really matters for how they're doing in ministry. After 15 years, I don't care what theological tradition you're in, you're going to get beat up, probably. Some of you will be fortunate and not have that experience. But a lot of us will get beat up in ministry, and you'll come into me and you'll speak authentically about what it's like to be human and have people say really mean things about you and your family and attack you when you think it's really unfair. Help me figure this out. That's my honest response. And that's been my experience at the center. I have my theological tradition, which happens to be Wesleyan, and I think we have the truth, but maybe you all do. I don't know. Wesley loved Luther, so there you go.
Another question here. Are the figures you shared concerning the personal benefits of spirituality consistent across various religions and or spiritual practices?
What the research suggests is that yes, it is. So some of you may know the research with Buddhist monks where they do they're called brain scans. They're called fMRI scans. And they do the brain scans of Buddhist monks who have meditated for years. And you can literally see the brain, how it's changed compared to the typical person in the population. They've also looked at people in Christian tradition. They've looked at Carmelite nuns who pray all the time. Similar brain scans. In terms of being calm, centered, that kind of thing. They've looked at Protestants with rich spiritual tradition. Similar brain scans. The key is that you have that belief system in which you're practicing your spirituality. I don't know how that sounds theologically to you. I don't even argue or talk theology with people as a psychologist, but that's what the research suggests. My guess is that in Protestant traditions, like Methodism, Lutheran, Reformed, that we're going to be more similar than not if we actually engage in our spiritual practices. That's the key. There's just a lot of people who don't, even ministers. And maybe in the Lutheran Brethren, back to your point, that's been one thing I've really been impressed by you. I'm about to give you a compliment, is you really, really do seem committed as a group to practicing your spiritual devotion.